Hi everyone, so today I am actually going to talk about, well, these very beautiful, stunning examples of Leporacanthicus joselimai. So this is your Sultan Pleco, is one of the common names for this species, and these are some larger, well, sexually mature specimens, I'd say. Leporacanthicus joselimai is in the order Coeluriform and the family loricariidae, meaning they are catfishes and plecos. By common name anyway. And other members of this genus Leporacanthicus would be Leporacanthicus heterodon, which is, I think, golden vampire pleco. Vampire pleco being the common name more or less for the genus. And also Galaxius, Leporacanthicus galaxius, which has almost reverse markings. So in these guys you could probably see on camera that it's got that grey brownish appearance with dark spots. Galaxius, on the other hand, is a much darker fish but with white spots. And there's other variants or potentially new other species that are very similar to Galaxius, such as L240 and stuff like that anyway. So Leporacanthicus is very distinctive, I think, and probably this specimen is the most, well, shows it off the best. Leporacanthicus is mainly defined by this beautiful, well, this really interesting, like, hook at the back of, well, I would say this is like the neutral plate area. It's quite different when looking at these guys compared to actually like Ancestris, but they've got this hook there that you can see in all of these fishes, that hook at the back, just let's say just behind the two eyes, and they have that very much elongated head. And then when they're alive, you can see they've got an elongated snout, and one of these specimens is actually really good for showing so this one, I think there's another one that shows it off really well as well. So if we look at, they all get in the way, and so if we look at these two, I look like I'm holding them like dolls, and if I let it focus, you can see they've got this very large sort of lower part to that suction pad, or lower jaw part of the suction pad. And it's quite elongated. I would say it's larger than a lot of the other species, and it tends to have a lot of, like, you can see, like, and then it has those little, like, tentacles. I had the word for it, like, tubercle kind of, not tubercles. Anyway, that on the front of this upper, part of the suction pad that is part of the upper jaw, if you get what I mean. And also, like all loricariids, they do have barbels. So here's one there's one here. Every time I move my hand, it probably moves the thing out of focus. There we go. And one of the main things about Leporacanthicus that you can see is they have very sparse teething. And this is the big thing that makes them kind of interesting, I would say. So if I have my dissection kit, which is really useful just to point out things, because they've got that very sparse teething. So carnivorous loricariids generally have few but more maybe elongate teeth. And if I just lean it there, and then that will focus on there. But you can see that it's got these sort of, I think it's around 3 top teeth, and I would say they are, is it no, it could be bicupsid, where they have, it branches out a little bit. But it's quite interesting just to look at, you can't really see the shape of the teeth. I would say it's very much maybe flatter at the bottom, but generally these teeth, and if you look at this jaw shape, it's very much to get into crevices and or maybe getting into their food. And we know in the wild they actually do feed on mollusks, so they're having to get into this snail shell, which makes that their jaw quite interesting to look at. And while I've looked after many of them, I never really had specimens for quite a while really to take an intense look at them. And I think this jaw anatomy really shows what makes many of the carnivorous ones a little bit more different, especially when it comes to hypostomnae. So others, true carnivores are, other than Leporacanthicus, is Scobenensistrus and Pseudocanthicus out of hypostomnae. There is like one or two others, but you don't really see them. And as I said, these guys will feed on mollusks. They also feed on like aquatic insect larvae. But I think it's quite interesting just to look at that difference in dental anatomy and then compare it. If we look at the bottom jaws, it's maybe a little bit more similar to what we're more familiar with when it comes to loricariidae. So if I just turn the fish, is that easier to see it there? But it's got these like tooth plates, two small tooth plates which hold only a small number of teeth. Is there about 3, 4? No, maybe a bit more. But it doesn't hold that many teeth. Yeah, it's about 3. Although these specimens look like they might have lost a few teeth. Interestingly, they are probably still wild caught. And I wonder whether that would result in what we see, really. But you can see there's not many teeth in general. So if we look at them in general, let's go for sort of loricariidae anatomy. So they have these dermal plating. They've got the sucker mouth. And then they've got odontodes, which are these spines all around the body. The hypertrophied ones generally means that they're larger. So if we, in general, and a lot of hypostomnae anyway, the males will have larger, more numerous odontodes, particularly at the gillipercula, pectoral fins, and the caudal peduncle. But I think these fish are quite interesting because they're a little bit unique and they're a bit more out of what I generally deal with. And I believe we do have likely a mixture of males and females. The only issue is that the fact they're preserved, so formalin tends to make the animals very fixed. I like to use the genital papillae as a way of sexing fishes, especially loricariidae, and it's not the easiest to see at all. But generally I would assume this one has the more rounded appearance, makes it look more female. But then we got these differences in head shape. So I just think it's good to... So one interesting thing I think is when you look at stuff like this, a lot of people might say that things that look different might be different species, but it could be different age groups, different regional variants. Regional variants can be as valuable as different species, so preventing hybridization or crossbreeding is always a benefit. It does create, I guess, a stronger bloodline in some cases for captive breeding, but it does make them, like, conservationally probably not as valuable. But you can see this has a much broader head than this fish here. We can see, yeah, and you can't really see the genital papillae, especially in this fish. It's very sort of flat, which suggests to me female, whereas this one's a little bit more elongate, but is still a lot flatter. And then this one, it looks like it's been retracted. I don't know how, but I just thought it's quite interesting just to look at these specimens, and you can see some of them really have quite large odontode growth. So this guy, you can see it kind of shines because of what they're formed of there. And I'll try and raise the fins, but it can really damage them. And you can see the spotting. But generally, if you think of these fishes as they're designed so much for going into cracks and crevices in rocks, looking for aquatic invertebrates, they're quite deep fishes, I would say. In terms of loricariidae, probably not adapted so much for dealing with flow. Instead, maybe that does define a lot of the different anatomy we see comparing herbivores maybe to carnivores. But then saying that you got species like, well, generally like Barancisius, which is very strict herbivorous, but it's quite a deep, hefty fish. And maybe there's a little bit more to it, but a lot of aquatic invertebrates aren't going to be stuck to the edge, if you get what I mean. Stuck to the edge on the rocks, on the wood. So these guys are very adaptable as loricariidae, and I should have talked about their care maybe a little bit earlier. So they come from the Rio Tapos, I don't know how to pronounce it, in Brazil. And I find them the most adaptable of the carnivorous hypostominae, I'd say. And they're the ones I tend to recommend to more people, given that they do better and handle, well, sort of 25 to 27 degrees centigrade. And a lot of the carnivores generally want 28 degrees or above. So it makes these guys a lot more beneficial. I understand these individuals don't look the brightest. Formalin does strip a lot of the colour out. But they're still beautiful and very interesting fishes. The juveniles have very bright white seams. Oh, tissues getting all over, stuck to their dontos. So they're quite interesting, and they are still very territorial, and some people have noted that they are particularly more territorial than other fishes, but I've seen Pseudocanthicus do a lot worse. I would say maybe in general the carnivores might be more territorial. I'm not sure why they would be. They're all species of hypostominae tend to be, apart from maybe Encystus ranunculus and those of Encystus. But if we look at them, it's just quite interesting to just see them when they're still, and especially the dental anatomy, I think. And if you look online, you'll see plenty of photos of dental anatomy of other loricariidae, and you'll see that they have much larger plating, and this is the sign that what is a true carnivore and what's not. If you look at Hypencystus, for example, which I would say isn't the omnivore or carnivore that people think, it's more maybe aligned with surface scraping. I say herbivory because it's very difficult to define in aquatics. They've got much more larger tooth plates, more built in for rasping against the surface, whereas this is more for getting in at something. Diets in captivity, if you can get snails, that would be really cool. And really like enriching for them. I'd always provide a lot of flow, but going more into diet, loads of different invertebrates. Maybe even if you could get things to sink, like cockroaches that have been like Debia roaches that have died, and stuff like that. They have been noted to be very prone to bloat, and this, I think, maybe one of the reasons I should have talked about them from the beginning is that if you look at a lot of loricariidae, their bloat is a major issue. And being carnivores, a lot of carnivorous diets aren't actually aimed at carnivory really, in the sense that these fish are. A lot of diets might be high in fish meal and krill meal, which is nothing like what they'd eat in the wild. They probably would eat a bit of decaying flesh, but not that much. So I think it's just aiming for that high insect intake. And I think the reason there's a lot of issues of bloat is that there's a lack of chitin in a lot of diets that these guys are fed on, hence why they are prone to bloat. But when they're fed like plant matter, they're not, because plant matter has quite a lot of our cellulose, and that's quite difficult to break down, and that might help really with how the fish are digesting. So really I would say looking at that, adding up that chitin content. And I don't know whether, I would say Repashy bottom scratch would probably be the best diet because it covers a range of different invertebrates. Another thing is a lot of diets contain a lot of cereals and vegetables, which won't be really anything close to their natural diet. Vegetables are nothing like algae, and neither are cereals. So I'm not really sure why the obsession with them is so like big. But anyway, so I just thought I'd show off these guys. They're quite cool. The lovely patterning, and they're quite a popular species. So I think it might be worth just. A lot of people get confused with confused with identifying a lot of loricariidae. And if you just look at this sort of elongated head, that hook on the back, generally they've got this spotting marking, or other Leporacanthicus might have the dark coloration with white spots, but generally just looking at that body shape, and colours can be so deceptive. Look at body shape, and I know it's difficult, but you get the hang of it. The more exposed you are to different species and taxa, the better you'll be. Anyway, thank you for watching.